Good evening, everybody. Uneducated Economist here. So, thank you for joining in on today's live stream. This evening's, we are going to be talking about how it is that the Federal Reserve purposefully allows misinterpretations of what it is that. All right, we back. God, terrible way to start the live stream. Okay, what the future forward guidance is planning on doing, and when people misinterpret this future forward guidance, it actually creates better policy. And I'm going to show you how it is that this happens within this speech given by Phillips Jefferson. Let me cruise it up to the top here. Let's see here. It was given Phillips Jefferson May 13th of 2024. The title of this is Communicating About Monetary Policy. Now, I want to thank Brody actually for bringing this up in today's live stream, the one we did earlier this afternoon, and saying, hey, wasn't there some communication about using uncertainty inside of their monetary policy? And I was like, you're absolutely right, there was. Let me go find it. Let's do a live stream about it. Let's break this down. So now this is the section that he talks about this, and this is really good. Once you have internalized this, you can really see it playing out every single time you find a Federal Reserve official coming out and doing a press conference or doing an interview. You can see it playing out when as far as how they are using this manipulation tactic. Okay, here we go. This is how the speech in this paragraph, it's I don't know, it's quite a ways down. What page? Page 7 of the speech. There's a link down in the description. Surely sometimes central bank communications can have unintended consequences. Let me give you 2 examples. First, there is always risk that policymakers' statements about their economic outlook or their expected future path of the policy rate are interpreted by the public with false sense of certainty. A false sense of certainty. For example, a data-dependent forward guidance announcement can be mistaken for a commitment to a fixed path of interest rates. I'm going to read this through and then we'll break it down. When that interpretation is proven wrong down the road, it can create volatility and uncertainty than if there had been no announcement. That is why policymakers always make sure to stress the data dependency of the future the future policy decisions. Second, it is also possible that the public misinterprets the views of the individual policymakers as a committee view. The potential for misinterpretation is especially acute when many policymakers speak at the same time and disagree with each other. The diversity of viewpoints among policymakers leads itself to stimulating debates and ultimately better policy. But in such situations, more communication could increase rather than reduce uncertainty about our policy. Now, most people hear this and will probably just take it at face value and just think, yeah, okay, they're just talking about, how it is that they communicate and that the people listen to it. All right. We can simply blow it off, but they actually say something very, very important and how it is that they use their communication. So I'm going to break this part of the speech down, and I'm going to share this with you in a way that you probably are never really thought of hearing. All right? Because of the credible threat theory, you're able to see it much easier. All right, here we go. So I'm going to break this down again. It says, surely sometimes central banks' communication have unintended consequences. Let me give you 2 examples. First, there's always a risk that policymakers' statement about their economic outlook or their expected future path of the policy rate are interpreted by the public with a false sense of certainty. So the Federal Reserve has never been real certain about their future path. Sometimes they are. Sometimes they do give forward guidance. But when the public and the communication through the channels of propagandized narrative media, when they put it out there in such a way that the public has interpreted that with this false sense of certainty, what ends up happening from that, right? Let me read it again. First, there is always the risk that policy statements about their economic outlook or their expected future path of the policy rate are interpreted by the public with a false sense of certainty. For example, the data-dependent forward guidance announcement can be mistaken for a commitment to a fixed path of interest rates. So as they are coming out with their talking about what it is that they are doing in the future, that data dependent, like whether or not the data says it's okay for us to do it, that is interpreted by the public with a false sense of certainty. So when it comes down the line and it doesn't happen the way it should have, what do people think? The Fed failed, right? So let's read it again. For example, a data-dependent forward guidance announcement can be mistaken for a commitment to a fixed path of interest rates. Not the same thing. People had committed themselves to the Federal Reserve doing this. They have no other choice. They have already pretty much said that they were going to do it, and that's what people are committed themselves to. But then the Federal Reserve didn't say that. They said that they were data dependent. And the data always changes. That's why I keep saying it. Like, the data is never the same. All right. When that interpretation is proven wrong down the road, it can create more volatility and uncertainty than if there had been no announcement. So if they hadn't said anything about it, right, down the road, when the event took place, people wouldn't be like, oh man, the Fed failed or whatever, because they never announced what it was that they were planning on doing, right? When that interpretation is proven wrong down the road, it can create volatility and uncertainty than if there had been no announcement. That is why policymakers always make sure to stress data dependence of future policy decisions. What? That's why the policymakers always make sure to stress the data dependence of future policy decisions. They are never locking themselves in. They're always data dependent. Second, it is possible that public misinterprets the views of individual policymakers as a committee view. So as the policymakers are out there doing their talk with the mainstream media, and they're doing their, interviews and stuff, the people who hear that think of it as being a committee view. So when those people are out there speaking, giving their own personal opinions about it, people who hear that, the receiver of that information may interpret that as a Fed commitment when it's just the individual's belief, right? They're a member of the FOMC. They can have their individual thoughts, but they're not speaking on behalf of the FOMC. That's only Jerome Powell. They only have their own independent thoughts. So what ends up happening is that it is possible that the public misinterprets these views of individual policymakers as the committee view. All right. The potential for misinterpretation is especially acute when many policymakers speak at the same time and disagree with each other. This is important right here, because you think about it. Just earlier today, I did 3 articles, all had 3 different Fed officials, all with the word uncertainty being used in the title or the description of the video, or the description of the article. So this is important, because that's like 3 Fed officials coming out creating uncertainty. And this is exactly what they're talking about right here in this speech that they gave months ago. All right. The potential for misinterpretation is especially acute when the many policymakers speak at the same time and disagree with each other. The diversity of viewpoints among policymakers lends itself to stimulating debates and, ultimately, better policy. You get that? Let me read it again. The diversity of viewpoints among policymakers lends itself to stimulating debates. What was the potential for misinterpretation is especially acute when policymakers speak at the same time and disagree with each other. The diversity of viewpoints, all these people disagreeing with each other, among these policymakers lends itself to a stimulating debates and ultimately better policy. Why is it better policy? Because all these people speaking at the same time has everybody misinterpreting the information. When you have people misinterpreting the information, you have a situation of uncertainty. So what they do is they create a sense of certainty, then hit the people with with an ultimate outcome that was not the way that they were certain of. All was data dependent. And the whole point of this being is that if they do it in this fashion where they create a sense of certainty within the market, which is a false sense of certainty because they never really did promise that outcome. By doing this, what they are going to do is create a sense of uncertainty the moment that that outcome doesn't come to the fruition that they thought it was going to. By doing this outcome, they have people have misinterpreted the information, creating this uncertainty. It is especially acute. The misinterpretation is especially acute when many policymakers speak at the same time and disagree with each other. And this diversity of viewpoints is ultimately better policy, right? It lends itself to stimulating debates and ultimately better policy. But in such situation, more communication could increase rather than reduce uncertainty about policy. Now, this is how they communicate. This is how they get the information out there to the people to then interpret the information in a way that then guides the way that they want the markets to behave. When they want uncertainty within the markets, they create that uncertainty by having the data dependency of the Federal Reserve communicated in a way as if it was solidified in stone that this is what they are planning on doing. And then when the future comes and it doesn't come that way, and people are, oh man, I thought for sure we knew what you were doing. And they said, oh, but we were data dependent the whole time. As people are looking at this information and they think, well, what is it that the Federal Reserve is up to? The Federal Reserve is purposely creating a situation that has the uncertainty because it is ultimately better policy. Because now, as they go into the future and communicate to the people, the more that they communicate in a way that creates the certainty, they can create a situation in which that they move the markets in the direction that they want it to go. It's not about moving interest rates. It's about communicating to the markets what it is that they believe that the Federal Reserve is going to do going into the future. And the more that they get the people out there, the Federal Reserve officials out there disagreeing with each other, creating the uncertainty, it creates a better monetary policy for them. And I know this is hard enough to internalize, but this is exactly how it is that they conduct themselves. This is how they use their communication to get out there to the people in a way that then has their beliefs of a direction in which that they are going to either feel confident or not about the market or about the future, the uncertainty or the certainty about it. Again, I'm going to read this again. We're going to break it down, and I know this stuff is confusing. All right. But this is probably one of the more important parts of their communication styles and how it is that they are doing it. Right? Let me read it again from the top here. It says, surely sometimes central bank communications have unintended consequences. For example, let me give you two examples. First, there is always the risk that policymakers' statement about their economic outlook or their expected future path of policy are interpreted by the public with a false sense of certainty. For example, a data-dependent forward guidance announcement can be mistaken for a commitment to a fixed path of interest rates. When that interpretation is proven wrong down the road, it can create volatility and uncertainty uncertainty if there had been no announcement. So they create the announcement knowing that it's going to be interpreted because they deliver the message. The people interpret it in a particular way. They could be very clear. They could be very definitive in everything that they say, but they're not, right? When they interpret when that interpretation is proven wrong down the road, it can create more volatility and uncertainty than if there had been no announcement. That is why policymakers always make sure to stress the data dependence of future policy decisions. They always stress it, that's right, but the people who have received the information may have received it in a way that is not one of that of like data dependent. They may believe it of one of certainty, of one that is definite. It is going to happen. All right. That is why policymakers is always making sure that they stress the data dependence of future policy decisions. Second, it is always possible that the public misinterprets the views of individual policymakers as a committee view. How many people have done that? Listen to something that, Michelle Bowman has said, or something that, even Jefferson has said, or one of the other Fed officials who are out there talking, somebody who is not Jerome Powell, and interpret that as a committee's like view of how it is that they're looking at the economy, or how they're looking at monetary policy. It's not. It's their own personal view. They have a vote on monetary policy, but they are not speaking on behalf of the FOMC. They're speaking on their own. But yet people may interpret it as a committee view. The potential for misinterpretation is especially acute when many policy makers speak at the same time and disagree with each other. And this is what I find interesting. The misinterpretation of the views of the individual policymakers or the committee view, right? And this is especially acute, this misinterpretation, when you have many of them doing it. Think about that. Like, they come out and they get the people to misinterpret misinterpret the information on purpose, so that it creates the uncertainty within the public's belief of what they are thinking of monetary policy. They have no idea. At times they will create the certainty only to deliver an outcome that is not that of what that certainty had provided, or what was going to provide. You see how they do this? This is like, to me, this is like a fine line inside of the credible threat theory, right? How it is that they use their words, how it is that they create uncertainty within the market because they know it's going to create a better policy. Not one where they debate whether or not it's a good or bad thing. It creates the uncertainty that they then use to then guide the markets in the future. You think about how many times people are sitting on the Federal Reserve's every word, trying to figure out what it is that they plan on doing at the next interest rate cut or interest rate adjustment meeting. That's the only thing that people want to talk about. Are they going to cut? Are they not going to cut? And to me, it doesn't matter what they do. That cut isn't going to affect the economy for 6 months to a year down the road. I am more interested in how it is that they are communicating about the future path. Are they looking at it saying, we are seeing like unemployment rising dramatically? Are we seeing a situation in which that they are, like, for example, most people look at their inflation target of 2% and misinterpret that. Like, we know that they are going from moderately above 2%. They admit that over and over again within their own words. It never comes out in the public. The public never talks about moderately above 2% for some time. They never talk about flexible average inflation targeting as opposed to a targeting regime. And so when I look at stuff like this and I think about how it is that they use the uncertainty, and then I see the articles that came out today or yesterday, and it has many different Fed officials coming out, and the word uncertainty is written within every single one of them, it only leads me to believe that this is part of their strategy to deliver the message in which that they are creating it, right? Creating that uncertainty. And to me, it's not uncertain. To me, it's the whole thing is very certain. What they are planning on doing, whether people want to look at the interest rate adjustment or not, what the whole goal is to try and have the Fed funds rate at neutral. And how it is that they get that Fed funds rate to neutral, whether they lower the Fed funds rate to neutral, or if the neutral interest rate rises to the Fed funds rate, however it happens, that to me is their ultimate goal, because that's what they said that they wanted for the entire time. Like, low unemployment is still fairly low. Inflation is moderately above 2%. I don't know what moderately means. I mean, I've tried to figure out exactly what moderate means. There is no term for moderate. Here, you guys want to hear, like, see, this is the stuff that you get if you are a member of the channel. This is the type of stuff that I break down. I break down these speeches only, like, this one I kind of went a little crazy on, but you know, generally when I break down these speeches, I break them down in their entirety. Where is that one? Okay, Powell, here we go. All right, August 27th of 2020. You guys want to hear this? Is blow you away. If this is the first time you've ever heard this information, but it's not. It's probably because everybody's been on this channel before and they know what's going on. But it says here, the persistent undershoot of inflation from our 2% long-run objective is a cause for concern. Many find it counterintuitive that the Fed would want to push up inflation. Like, push it up. Make it go higher. Right? This is 2020. August of 2020, he was delivering this speech. After all, low and stable inflation is essential for a well-functioning economy, and we are certainly mindful that higher prices for essential items such as food, gasoline, and shelter add to the burdens faced by many families, especially those struggling with lost jobs and incomes. They know it's going to hit them the hardest. Inflation is going to be horrible about them. They're at the lower end. They're going to suffer the worst about it. However, those poor people are going to have to suffer because inflation that is persistently too low can pose serious risks to the economy. Couldn't let the rest of the people suffer that much. Not like the poor people are going to have to suffer. Inflation that runs below its desired level can lead to an unwelcome fall in long-term inflation expectations, which in turn can pull actual inflation even lower, resulting in an adverse cycle of ever lower inflation and inflation expectations. Now, would he be talking about this just because it was fun, or was it a real problem? Like, he wouldn't just be making this stuff up and saying, okay, we're going to be talking about this stuff, and say, there's no reason to talk about it. There's just talk about it. Of course not. It was super important. It was scaring them. They had no clue of what it was that they were going to do. No, absolutely. They had every clue of what they were going to do because they've been planning this for a while, right? To prevent this outcome and adverse dynamics that could ensue, our new statement indicates that we will seek to achieve inflation that averages 2% over time. Therefore, following periods when inflation has been running below 2%, appropriate monetary policy will likely aim to achieve inflation moderately above 2% for some time, whatever moderately above 2% is. Because in seeking to achieve inflation that averages 2% over time, we are not tying ourselves to a particular mathematical formula that defines the average. Thus, our approach could be viewed as a flexible form of average inflation targeting. Our decision about appropriate monetary policy will continue to reflect a broad array of considerations and will not be dictated by any formula. That's it. They will not be dictated by any formula. This is why I don't follow anything that anybody has ever said on the mainstream media when it comes to the 2% target. If they have that in their strategy, they are wrong. They were wrong the entire time, and they are wrong today. Here on the Uneducated Economist, we are the only ones who have actually internalized this stuff and theorized on it and know that we are getting it right. I don't know how it is that I am the only one who wants to break down this information that the Federal Reserve seems to communicate to each other, but doesn't seem to communicate necessarily out there in the public, is beyond me. But everybody wants to regurgitate all mainstream media publications, propagandized information, but very few people want to deliver the information for what it really is, and that's the monetary policy is one that seeks inflation moderately above 2% for some time. And the inflation target is a long-run average target. If I shoot at 1%, 3%, 1%, 3%, 1%, 3%, what's my average? It's 2%. That's what's happening. They ran persistently under 2% for 10 years, barely making a 2%. They had a 2% target since 2012, never once ever did it. Right? Since 2012, nothing. I'm sorry guys, I'm just kind of going off here. Super chat, Simon, yep, sorry guys. Infamous NYC, thank you so much. Do you think the Tesla fires are like the bird flu chickens? Fed wants inflation. No. Cars are insured, no. Tesla had bad sales numbers globally. Yeah, Um, do you think the Tesla fires are like the bird flu chickens? I don't know. I'm sorry. To be honest with you, I don't know what the Tesla fires are all about. I haven't really been paying attention to that. I did was reading where old Musk is like no longer Doge king, right? I guess he's king of Doge, but he's no longer Doge Department of whatever government efficiencies, whatever the hell he was supposed to do. I guess what is he stepping down? Is that right? I don't know. I was reading some information about that earlier, and I thought that was kind of interesting. I don't know. I'm sorry, infamous NYC. I really appreciate the super chat, but I'm not sure exactly what the question. Fed wants inflation. No. Cars are insured. No. Sorry, guys. All right. Good morning. Hey, good morning, Magic Man. Thank you for being here. Is there a reason why above 2%? Yeah, that's what I kept reading, and I know I read it fast, right? So here, let me back this up and read this slow, right? Because that question comes up a lot. Is there a reason why above 2%? They're making up for the fact that they were running persistently below 2%. All right. And the problem with this is if you read this whole speech, you can go and find it yourself. If you read the whole speech, what you will realize is that if you have persistently low inflation, it will create an anchor persistently long inflation below the 2% target, which can then make it very difficult for the Federal Reserve to operate its monetary policy. Because if you have a low inflation and the Fed funds rate is very low, then what ends up happening is when they try to stimulate the economy is that they run to the lower bound of zero and they are not able to stimulate the economy. So now the problem that they were facing, like everything is cool all the way up until they hit the lower bound. So like low inflation is not really that big of a deal until they get to lower bound of zero. And now it's like, crap, what do we do? Right? Because trying to stimulate the economy becomes essentially ineffective by using interest rate adjustments because they're there at zero. Inflation is low, neutral interest rate is low, everything has gone down to low zero. And so now trying to stimulate the economy is essentially gone. Like interest rate adjustments isn't going to work. This is where the mass quantitative easing comes in, government spending, and the propagandized information that it will create an inflationary scenario. And I know I was one of them who was spreading that information during quantitative easing 1, 2, 3, and 4, dived headfirst into silver, believing that there was going to be a hyperinflation scenario during that time because the Federal Reserve had taken a balance sheet of $850 billion to over $4.5 trillion, but yet failed to produce an inflationary scenario. It didn't occur, right? They ran persistently below 2% since 2012 when they decided that they were going to go to that target of 2% and still couldn't do it. Like they were going to run either, like if they had been above 2%, they would have tried to adjust policy down to 2. If they ran below 2%, they would have adjusted back up to 2 by either restricting or accommodating the economy with interest rate adjustments. However, boom, they hit the lower bound of zero and there was no longer an effective tool. All right. Our long-run goal continues to be an inflation rate of 2%. Our statement emphasizes that our actions to achieve both sides of our dual mandate will be most effective if long-term inflation expectations remain well anchored at 2%. However, if inflation runs below 2% following economic downturns, but never moves above 2% even when the economy is strong, then over time, inflation will average less than 2%. Households and businesses will come to expect this result, meaning that inflation expectations will tend to move below our inflation goal and pull realized inflation down. Everything keeps going down, down, down. And this is the problem. They needed an inflationary scenario. It goes back so far that they are scared of deflation more than they are inflation. It goes back so far that Ben Bernanke was writing a speech predicting the quantitative easing and predicting asset purchases of like foreign entities. It's like it's very telling of what has come. And now the last thing that the Federal Reserve is going to communicate this stuff to you is in a real sense of how it is that they are doing this or why they are doing this, because the moment that they do, the whole system that they have built as far as using their communications to deliver a message to you would cease to exist. You believing that they are trying to go for a 2% target is ultimately the way that they have gaslit you into being able to actually try and achieve a 2% or a moderately above 2%. It's what they are trying to do. The long run, they communicate it in a way that they're not necessarily lying either. If you listen to them, they say that our 2% objective, our 2% goal, our 2% over the long run, 2%, they say these things that make you believe that they are trying to get there and be there. They have never been able to do it. Not once in the history of time. And so I don't have any belief that they're ever going to do it going into the future. There's no reason to. So again, being above 2% then gives them the ability to keep interest rates elevated, right? With the idea that they are combating inflation because they're trying to get it down to 2%. So long as inflation runs persistent, and with the help of the credible threat of tariffs, inflation does run persistent. The Federal Reserve says, hey, we're going to have to sit here and, with the uncertainty and, don't know what we're doing here. And then sit there and wait for the inflationary scenario and the inflation expectation to raise the neutral interest rate, which essentially makes the economy less restricted the closer the neutral interest rate gets to the Fed funds rate. And I've been saying this over and over again. This is how it operates. This is how they are doing it. And to understand how it is that they are going to move this sort of expect them to try and get the Fed funds rate to neutral. That's my expectation. That's what I believe that they are trying to do. It's what they said that they were going to do. It seems to be what's happening. And everything else, people are like, well, what about this, that, and the other thing? And I'm like, yeah, I know. It's all symptoms of them trying to get there. Right? To me, I'm like, okay, I'm going to see if you guys get to neutral, that's going to be impressive, right? You keep that interest rates all elevated up at the Fed funds level, the Fed funds rate elevated, and you get that neutral interest rate all elevated, and then all of a sudden now you have ammunition. You're able to drop interest rates well below the neutral interest rate. Even if you take it to the lower bound of zero, you may have enough room to actually stimulate the economy with the lowering of rates. Holy moly. They did it? No way. No way. But yet, all these credible threats of tariffs and the pushing up of inflation expectations, it's pushing. I know it's going to push the neutral interest rate higher. Think about it. You're going to demand a higher return on your capital investments. So is everybody else. And as everybody else is demanding the higher return on their capital investments and pulls the interest rates up, not only in everything that you see out there, it's going to eventually lead into the neutral interest rate rising as well. Once this happens, you're going to start seeing that the Federal Reserve is going to have a position in which that using Fed funds rate adjustments will be an effective tool. And people will never have realized that this entire time that they are using forward guidance and jaboning credible threats in order to conduct themselves. And you can see it. Think about it. They've been sitting on their hands, essentially. They don't do anything. They did some balance sheet adjustments, which is, impactful in a way, right? But it's not nearly as impactful as the perception of what it is that they plan on doing with interest rates. That's way impactful. And they created that. They made it that way. It's amazing to think. All right, 100 people watching. I guess I'm boring tonight. Not a good topic. All right, as you understand the Fed now, is there any doubt in your mind about the John Williams Fed speech about the low interest rate future? What are the chances that just inception? Okay, here, let's bring it up. What's okay, here, let's... Where is that speech? It's in here somewhere. Hold on one second. Longer on average, make a strategy monetary policy for a low neutral interest rate world. Okay, monetary policy strategies for a low neutral interest rate world. All right. So in this speech, this is a really good speech. Anybody who this is one of the very, in fact, this is the very first speech that I broke down on my channel. And there is, I believe there's actually a playlist to this speech. And I like going back to that playlist and watching it. And I'm thinking, oh my gosh, I got that so, like I had no idea. I was such an amateur at this. I look back and it's like I'm almost embarrassed by it, but you know what? It's like it was the early days, and this is what led me to where I am today. So it's part of the process, right? So anyway, if you want to see something funny, you go down and watch that. And now watch, so we break down the speech, right? Way different from the very first one I ever done. It's weird to think I've been doing this a long time, guys. I've been breaking these speeches down a very long time. Right? Okay. What were we talking about? Oh yeah. How are they planning on dealing with this? All right. Let me read some of the things. What do I got here? It says, today we face an altogether different good Lord, I can't speak. Today we face an altogether different set of problems stemming from a very low neutral interest rate, that is, the short-term real interest rate consistent with an economy operating at its potential alongside low and stable inflation. Ironically, the problem we need to solve these days is the risk of inflation that is persistently too low rather than too high. That's the problem they needed to solve. Okay? And so you think about it, like, if there was nothing else that you knew about anything, like you didn't know a single thing about you didn't know nothing about Russia, Ukraine, you didn't know nothing about Trump, you didn't know nothing about Musk, you didn't know nothing about nothing, right? And you heard the problem that they need to solve these days is the risk that inflation is persistently too low rather than too high. And that was the only thing you heard. Would you say that they got it or not? Right? Because that was the problem that they needed to solve in 2018, was the risk of inflation that was persistently too low rather than too high. Now he goes on to say, today, low neutral interest rate reflects a culmination of trends extending back 25 years. This goes back a long time. A quarter century ago, a typical estimate of the neutral interest rate was 2 to 2.5%, consistent with historical averages over the preceding half century. Since then, however, there has been a clear downward trend in the neutral interest rate in the United States and other advanced economies, with current estimates ranging from 0 to 1.5%. Three main global trends, so 0 to 1.5%. They don't know exactly where neutral is, right? They just know it was low and getting lower. Three main global trends appear to account for the bulk of the decline in the neutral interest rate over the past century. Three main trends for the bulk of the decline. One is demographics. Populations are aging as people are living longer and birth rates have fallen. Second is productivity growth, which has slowed around the world. The third is a heightened demand for safe and liquid assets, which has led to a wider wedge between yields on safe government securities, central bank reserves, and the yields on riskier assets such as corporate bonds. Now, during the pandemic, think about something for just a minute, right? There is so much conspiracy crap that blasted through, right? So much. It was unreal. I couldn't take it. I couldn't listen to it. I didn't even bother. People were like, dude, you got to listen to this, and I can't. I'm not going to, right? Yeah, you're right. It's all whatever, right? Think about this. One, demographics. Populations are aging, and this is the problem that they were facing. Three main trends appear for the bulk and the decline of the neutral interest rate, which is their problem. Think about this. Number one, the problem, demographics. People are aging and living longer, and birth rates have fallen. It's a population issue. Aging population was an issue. Right? Problem, right? This is like interesting, right? Okay, so you got COVID, a bunch of old people died. I don't know, wasn't listening, didn't pay attention to any of that stuff, but I just heard. right? I heard a bunch of old people died, bunch of people died, right? One, demographics, populations are aging and people are living longer. Second, the productivity growth productivity growth which has slowed around the world. Think about this. If you move into say you went to school, went traveling around, whatever, figured out that you were going to be a plumber, trained to be a plumber, worked for some guy until you took an apprenticeship, became a plumber, got real good at it, and you're going to start a plumbing business back home. You move back home, and there's a bunch of plumbing businesses there, and there's just no room for you. There's no room for growth. That's what was happening around the world, right? Simple analogy for a much, 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 much bigger problem. Right? The second is the productivity growth, which has slowed around the world. The third, good Lord. The third is a heightened demand for safe and liquid assets. Now, I have to think about this. You slow down productivity and businesses fail. Production fails. All kinds of stuff fails. Now you got room for growth, right? If you slow it all down, if you dig it all up, right, what's going to happen? News going to grow. So when you destroy the economy, that's essentially giving the ability, it's like tearing the ground apart, getting down to dirt, and allowing for growth to then be happening, right? Allow growth to actually happen. Not that it's like expansion, making it good, just the direction, right? If you get to the point where you're just like, it doesn't grow anymore, that's it, right? Then you hack it all away. Now you got room to grow, right? Saying, right? That's what's happened. I'm not trying to say it's a good or bad thing. Just saying this is what's going on, right? Global growth had slowed around the world and it was a problem. How do you get global growth to go again? Well, just smash a bunch of businesses to crap and then allow new businesses to grow. All right. Third is the heightened demand for safe and liquid assets. This is an interesting one. During the pandemic, we had corporate bonds absolutely go through the roof, which means that the price goes up and the yields go down. And now, safe and liquid assets are U.S. Treasuries. They were close to zero. But corporate bonds had a big wedge between them. There was a big spread between where the safe and liquid assets were and where the risky bonds were. And so they wanted to tighten this wedge, right? They say it right here. The third is the heightened demand for safe and liquid assets. Everybody's buying into treasuries, which has led to a wider wedge between the yields on safe government securities and central bank reserves and the yields on riskier assets such as corporate bonds. During the pandemic, the spread between these two during the pandemic got very, very narrow. People were diving into corporate debt as they were believing that the Federal Reserve was going to be buying into corporate debt using a special purpose vehicle. And this slammed this wedge tighter during the time. All these things, think about it. All these things that they were saying was a problem in 2018, right? In 2018, there was too many old people. There was no room to grow. And these wide wedge between the safe and liquid assets between U.S. Treasuries and corporate bonds, and all three of those things happen to be alleviated-ish during the pandemic. I don't know how to describe it because it didn't like solve the problem. I'm just saying all three of those things happen to be like, going in the direction of what this was wanting. And I can't like say it any clearer than like this is what they wanted. Right? Like you give it any conspiracy theory you want. This guy was wanting that exact scenario in the middle of everybody's conspiracy mind. And I'm like, there was a guy out there in the banking system who had a monetary policy that was failing them because they were too close to the lower bound of zero with no room to stimulate. And the only way that they were going to be able to deal with this problem was deal with the problem that they had, which was too many old people, a global growth problem, and this widening wedge between safe and liquid assets and U.S. Treasuries, and all those things gone during the pandemic. I didn't say they're gone. They're actually there. But you know what I mean? They're like, all of a sudden going in the direction of what it is that he was hoping for. Importantly, this is going on, but back to the speech here. Importantly, the onset of these trends preceded the global financial crisis, and they have continued even as countries have recovered. Although there is a great, and remember, this is 2018, right? Although there is a great deal of uncertainty about the neutral interest rate, or the neutral rate, the end conditions may change, and a reasonable assumption is that it will remain low, not far from current levels for the foreseeable future, right? Up until now, right? Because of the elevated inflation expectation, which is what they were looking for. What does a low neutral rate mean for monetary policy and anchoring of inflation expectations? When a recession hits, central banks may not be able to reduce interest rates well below their neutral level to stimulate the economy as warranted because of the effective lower bound on nominal interest rates. This shortfall in monetary accommodations would result in less desirable economic outcomes during a recession and recovery. In particular, inflation would typically undershoot its desired target during these episodes. The persistence of below target inflation rates in many advanced economies over the past decade is a testament to this dynamic. You see how they had a problem with persistently low inflation? They couldn't deal with it. They were having a hell of a time conducting their monetary policy. The persistence of below target inflation rates in many advanced economies over the past decade is a testament to this dynamic. Right? They could not stimulate the economy because they would hit the lower bound of zero because inflation was too low. They needed high inflation so they could get the interest rates up elevated in order to be able to actually stimulate the economy with the adjustment of interest rates without hitting the lower bound of zero. But they needed all interest rates elevated. They needed neutral interest rate elevated. As a result of an inherent asymmetry introduced by the lower bound on interest rates, the inflation targeting central bank could experience inflation that is below target once we consider the average inflation rate over periods when policy is constrained and when it is not. Think about it, persistently below the 2%, right? When the central bank is not constrained. What does it say? Once we consider the average inflation rate over periods when the policy is constrained and when it is not. With inflation on average below the target level, inflation expectations will likely slip below the target rate as well. See, this is the problem that they were facing. In 2018, they had too low of an inflation expectation. It was too low. He basically was saying it right there. Even Donald Trump was out screaming at the end of his, administration, the Fed should be printing money because the Fed should be lowering interest rates into negative territory and printing money because there is no inflation, and the rich people know what he's talking about. Right? And this is like, once you see, I don't know, for me, like when I read this stuff and I think about what it is that's really happening out there, as opposed to what it is that people think is happening, what it is that people think is happening is actually giving power to the Federal Reserve. And that's what blows me away. If we really truly wanted to end the Federal Reserve, we would be reading these speeches to each other. I'm serious, right? Because this is how you break this stuff down. A simple example helps illustrate the problem. Say that 80% of the time, the lower bound on interest rates does not constrain policy and that central bank aims for 2% target inflation rate. During these good times, inflation targeting central bank aims to keep inflation near 2%. But 20% of the time, the economy falls into recession that's severe enough that the lower bound constrains policy. Much like the great financial crisis. Assume that during these periods of inflation averages only 1%. So 80% of the time, inflation averages 2%, and 20% of the time, inflation averages 1%. The resulting average inflation is about 1.8%. As a consequence, inflation expectations are likely to become anchored at a long-run average of 1.8% below the desired 2% target. And that's the problem that they were facing. He was describing it. He was saying, this is our issue right here. We are below 2% on average. And people are not worried about inflation. There's no inflation. The Fed should be printing money, right? Okay. But that's not the end of the story. The downward shift in inflation expectation has a second round effect on real interest rates, the economy, and inflation. When policy is constrained by the effective lower bound, a downward shift in inflation expectation raises the real interest rates, further diminishing the degree of monetary stimulus, making the downturn worse and reducing inflation even more. Even when times when policy is not constrained, the expectations of below target inflation in the future affects the current decisions, putting additional downward pressure on inflation. In other words, monetary policy is always swimming upstream, fighting a current of too low of inflation expectations that interferes with achieving the target inflation rate. Monetary policy is always swimming upstream, fighting a current of too low of inflation expectation. It's interfering with their monetary policy, interferes with achieving the target inflation rate. This was the problem. 2018, the Federal Reserve was looking for a position in which that they were fighting a too low of inflation expectation. Do they fight a too low of inflation expectation today? I don't think they do. They don't say they fight too low of an inflation expectation. For me, it seems to be moderately above the 2% target, which would be not fighting a too low of inflation expectation. But that was their problem back then. Monetary policy was always swimming upstream, fighting a current of too low of inflation expectations. A number of alternative monetary policy frameworks have been proposed to aim to tackle the problems associated with the lower bound on interest rates. Although they differ in many ways, it is useful to divide these proposals into three broad categories. First option is to maintain the basic framework of inflation targeting, and to rely on a combination of aggressive conventional and unconventional policy actions when facing economic downturns to limit the deleterious effects of the lower bound. This carries with it the risk that inflation expectations become anchored at too low of a level. And that's what they were facing from the great financial crisis. He was basically describing what was happening after the great financial crisis, is to essentially carry on the way that they had been doing it, with the quantitative easing, loading up the bank's balance sheet with a bunch of reserves, making a bunch of noise out there in the mainstream media about how it's going to create hyperinflation, and then hope that that would create an inflationary scenario by the inflation expectations being risen, by all the money printer go burr, but the money printer never really made it into the system. And he was saying that was the problem. They were at too low of inflation expectation even after the expansion of quantitative easings. 1, 2, 3, and 4. Balance sheet of $850 billion to $4.5 trillion failed to produce the inflation for them. Again, 2018. What do we do? We need some inflation, right? So the first option really wasn't going to work, right? Because they already tried that one, and it was like, it hardly worked at all. Second option. Here we go. Right. The second option is average inflation targeting, whereby the central bank purposefully aims to achieve an above target inflation in good times when the lower bound is not constrained. Interesting. Properly designed and implemented, really, yeah, no say. Okay, properly designed and implemented, such an overshoot can offset the inflation undershoot during bad times, so that the long-run average inflation rate and inflation expectations are in line with the target. Inflation expectations. How many people believe that they're going for a 2% target? Raise your hand, right? 2% average inflation rate over time, right? Flexible average inflation targeting. There we go. The third option is price level targeting, includes various offshoots such as nominal GDP targeting and temporary price level targeting. In such a regime, the central bank commits to keeping price levels near a steady growing target path, like average inflation targeting. This strategy promises to overshoot the target inflation rate in good times to make up for the inflation undershoot when policy is constrained. Make up for the inflation undershoot. Huh. Does that sound familiar? The makeup strategy? Here, we'll get to that in just a minute. In theory, both average inflation and price level targeting can solve the problem of anchoring inflation expectations at the target rate while maintaining a low inflation targeting rate amid low neutral rates. This is how they were planning on doing it, pushing inflation expectations above the 2% target, right? Why? Because of all the issues that we're facing when it comes to the lower bound and trying to stimulate the economy. Although price level targeting is a bigger leap from inflation targeting than average inflation targeting, each can be implemented in ways that are very similar to a standard inflation targeting. Both can be implemented in very similar to standard inflation targeting, either in terms of forecasting targeting, right? Forecasting it, or policy rule. Importantly, neither will likely be effective in practice unless communicated clearly and carried out consistently over time. More broadly, all these proposed strategies face potential costs and benefits in terms of macroeconomic performance, communication, and robustness to uncertainty, which require careful study. In considering alternative monetary policy strategies, academic experts, policymakers, and others from around the world have others from around the world have an important part to play, sharing and discussing ideas and comparing experiences to help all of us think through these issues. This process of careful study and discussions proved highly valuable during the development and implementation of inflation targeting in decades past and will be equally valuable in the present debates. Okay, so think about some of the things that he was talking about inside of that. Now, what I found interesting is he talked about make up for the fact that they failed to achieve that 2% target, right? Now, there is something called the makeup strategy. Literally, how robust are makeup strategies to key alternative assumptions? In this paper, right? You just put in the makeup strategies. I mean, where did this come from? What? Financial and Economic Discussion Series, Division of Research and Statistics and Monetary Affairs, Federal Reserve Board, Washington, D.C. How robust are makeup strategies to key alternative assumptions? In this, makeup strategies work best when the public understands, believes, and reacts to the policymaker's commitment to offset misses in inflation from the 2% objective in the future. In particular, makeup strategies are most powerful when policymakers can influence the public's inflation expectations. In doing so, policymakers face a dynamic tension. They must maintain long-run inflation expectations around 2% objective while at the same time moving short-run inflation expectations in response to the new strategy. Goes on. The effects of forward guidance on growth and inflation expectations are more difficult to assess because they depend on the public's interpretation of the guidance. An unexpected loosening could lower inflation expectations if the public interpret this action as the Federal Reserve predicting a weak economy in the future. If the public instead saw this change as simply reflecting a more accommodative policy stance, inflation expectations would be expected to rise. This is like all this information that I have found, nobody else is going to deliver this to you. What I just read is probably one of the most profound things that you could ever listen to when it comes to listening to the Fed and how it is that they are delivering that message. If you just want to forget about everything else that I said and say, okay, whatever it is, it's how they are delivering the message. You don't have to worry about the interest rates. You don't have to worry about anything else. How are they delivering the message? This is it. Listen to what it just said. Inflation expectations are more difficult to assess because they depend, inflation expectations are more difficult to assess because they depend on the public's interpretation of the guidance. An unexpected loosening could lower inflation expectations. If all of a sudden the market was looking at the Federal Reserve going, oh my God, they don't know what they're doing. They're loosening monetary policy unexpectedly. If they are loosening monetary policy unexpectedly, the public would interpret this action as the Federal Reserve predicting a weak economy in the future. If the public instead saw this change as simply reflecting a more accommodated policy stance, like the Federal Reserve is not doing this because of a weakening economy, they're just doing it for basically just being systematically working, low unemployment, there's, going in with the economy like it's, just operating at normal, right? If the public instead saw this change as simply reflecting a more accommodated policy stance, inflation expectation would be expected to rise. People would look at that saying, if you're going to be more accommodative, inflation is going to be pressured into that. And people would then look at inflation rising. They would have a higher inflation expectation. If they saw that the Federal Reserve was moving with a weakening mindset, they would lower inflation expectation. The action can be the same. That's important, right? So it doesn't matter. All the rest of the stuff, it doesn't matter. You look, okay, people are like, are they going to cut or not? Doesn't matter. What did they deliver with the information? Did they deliver it because it's a weakening economy, or did they deliver it because they are doing it for accommodative purposes? That's the information. That's the way you look at it. When you see them out there talking, oh, we're doing this because, we got inflation maybe, rising because of all the tariffs. You got tariffs, tariffs, inflation, tariffs. What do you think is going to happen? You're probably going to have an elevated inflation expectation where it results in real inflation as people begin to behave in a way that creates the inflationary scenario. Like, they haven't done anything. Nobody's done anything. Not yet, right? But it's reacting huge. Like, people are behaving hugely, but there's no, like, nothing's happened yet. No interest rate adjustments, no tariffs, nothing had happened. But yet the behavior of the people definitely happened. Man, I'm sorry, guys. I just kind of took over this live stream. I didn't even really read any of the comments. I'm sorry. Nobody's really, well, we got a few people, 110 people watching, and a lot of comments. Oh my gosh. Okay. 68 likes. Yeah. I guess you guys aren't really digging it that much. Okay. I can't join because he gets a bit wrong and spreads too much time in comments. Are you talking about me? I've just been out here for an hour and I've read like 3 comments. Did you really just say that, man? I know that times I do get into comments, but all right, 100% members chats are the best. Yeah, and I'm going to get into some more of them. We're going to break down, like, you think about it. Think of, like, the people who are not members to the channel. What I'm doing right now with these speeches, this is what we do on all those member-only videos, right? Is we break down these speeches in this way, and then we discuss every bit of these things. And see, it was Brody who brought it up about the part earlier about the uncertainty and how it is that they create that. They create it with a bunch of them coming out there and making it happen by many of them disagreeing with each other and people misinterpreting the information and then creating the uncertainty that they then use to guide the markets. They can then add certainty or uncertainty to it through the forward guidance, but always left open-ended because of their data dependence. It's like these guys are saying it, right? Like, not me, them. They're the ones who are saying it. And I'm just the uneducated economist trying to, like, deliver the information to you. Sometimes it's difficult to try and interpret it in a way, or to interpret and deliver it in a way that is accurate to what they are saying, but then they speak in such a way and they are doing things that are so, it's so beyond, like the truth is stranger than fiction, right? People would look at that and go like, wow, man, how did you find this stuff? How are you able to dig this stuff up? And I'm thinking, I can't see it any other way now. Like, to me, it isn't even a matter of digging it up. It's now everywhere. I find evidence of it constantly, and so do so do a lot of the other members of the channel and just followers of the channel. I have not hid any of this information from anybody. We in the members only channels really break this stuff down. We break it down in like I've been doing here with these speeches here. All right. I'll pay $1 a month for $2 of value. There you go. All-nighter. All right. Simon, can you invite some Fed presidents for interviews? I think A few would do. Your channel is. A few would do it. Your channel is pretty big. Um, I would love to interview a Fed official. I think that that would just be neat as hell. You know, Zuber. This whole truck stinks like gas. I love it. All right. Well, it's kind of like giving me a headache. All right. Um, Zuber was able to interview Claudia Sahm, which I thought was just way cool. I've actually got a few numbers to two different people who work at the Federal Reserve. Now, they're not like bankers. They like they're not like higher up, right? But from what I understand, they are in like some of the meetings and stuff like that where they are able to ask a question. So I could actually get a proxy question asked to a Fed official, right? To a Fed president. And so that would be pretty cool, but it would only be like, one question. It would be relayed through another dude. Claudia Sahm would be so rad to interview. I think she's just like the coolest, right? She is the one who had, I forgive me if I got it wrong, but it's a certain amount of, what is it, rise in unemployment over a certain period of time to, I forget exactly what the Sahm rule is. Forgive me. I should look it up here real quick. But it was so accurate. I just remember like when I learned about the Sahm rule and going back and looking how accurate it was, I was like, man, this thing is like on it until this time, right? This was the first time that unemployment had risen and didn't trigger the recession inside of what the Sahm rule would have predicted. And so, knowing that it was wrong is fine so long as you know why it was wrong, right? And that's like the difference inside of it, because really when I started predicting the recessionless recession, all the recession indicators that started coming out, I kind of dismissed them, right? I mean, I know there were good indicators of the past, but we weren't operating like we were in the past. And so when I said that we were going into a recessionless recession in which that you would see many things that would resemble what would appear to be a recession, but don't actually have the issues that normal recessions would have, which is a rise in unemployment and a bunch of corporations getting bailed out, that situation took place. Like, again, people might say, like, dude, you get things right for the wrong reason. It doesn't, like, whatever. I think that's the funniest thing I ever heard. I mean, I guess somebody triggered me on that one. I don't know. But I keep thinking about that. It was just like, how can you be right for the wrong reasons? If you're making predictions and saying it and it happens that way, then you got it, right? I mean, you're dialing it in. You're over target, especially if you got people who have never heard your information before saying that you don't know anything and you don't know nothing about the Fed and all this other stuff. And I'm like, I could sit on the FOMC. I could give advice about FOMC's meeting stuff. Like, from the working class point of view, I don't think anybody's got monetary policy dialed in as good as I do. And knowing that some of the things that I am seeing out there, it was things that I had predicted. It's much like elevated interest rates for an extended period of time. Getting high, staying high was a video that I did 2 years ago, right? Saying that they're going to keep these interest rates elevated in order to pull the neutral interest rate up. Here we are. Uh-huh. And people will be like, that's not the reason why they have the elevated interest rates, bro. And I'd be like, okay, whatever. I said it like a long time ago, all right? This is what they were going to do. And if people say that I'm doing it for, saying it for the, getting it right for the wrong reasons, that's the meaning that they have chosen to give it, have given it. I'm whatever, I mean, I'm still on it. Oh man, I'm too far away from the screen. Actually, I should just bring it up on this one. Here we go. All right. Oh, here we go. Sahm rule. Thank you, All Nighter. Is the 3-month moving average unemployment rate increasing by 50 basis points over the lowest rate in the last 12 months? Right. So that's what I thought. It was a certain amount of unemployment rising over a course of time by a certain amount, right? And that thing was like, it was awesome. It was like, I'm looking back at all that, like when I first learned about it, I'm like, holy crap, man, this thing is like good. And then it didn't work, right? And I knew it wasn't going to work. Well, I didn't know it was going to work. I predicted it wasn't going to work because of the things that I said, right? the because of the things I said, because of the recessionless recession. I mean, it was, to me, it was not surprising that inverted yield curve, that SOM rule, that all these things that would typically, like interest rates, the Federal Reserve, like all the stuff. Like, I mean, I don't like all the things that were happening that people would have typically had predicted a recession. It didn't happen in that fashion, and I knew it wasn't going to, because of the things that we had said. Like, because they had already pre-bailed out the recession. That was the reason why. Right? The corporations, I said it earlier, with the special purpose vehicles, were already bailed out with low yielding debt. So all these people were rushing into corporate debt. They funded these corporations with a ton of cash by buying up in that corporate debt. That funded the corporations. They hired a bunch of people. Unemployment fell to an incredibly low level. Like, service industry couldn't find anybody to work. And so as unemployment started to, well, as people were losing their jobs at the good high paying tech jobs, they were picking up jobs over at the service industry, which is still, like, I'm finding help wanted signs everywhere. And so you think about it, it's just like, how can you have a rise of unemployment even if you have lost a good job? You have a job, right? And with a job, you're not counted as unemployed. So unemployment wasn't going to rise so long as people were working. And even if they weren't working a job they wanted, they were working a job because there were so many jobs available. So how could you have unemployment rise during that time? You just simply couldn't. And that's one of the reasons why we saw unemployment as low as we did for as long as we have, even during what would seemingly be recessionary pressures. Right? The recessionless recession. I knew it. I knew it. I knew it. 100 basis points at once might shock the crap out of the markets and participants. Oh, yeah, absolutely. Like, you saw what a 50 basis point did. Would you rather 25 times 4 or 100 at once? I would rather deliver the message about it. That's what I would want to do. How about that? If the action needs to be taken, I want to be the one who delivers the message and gives the meaning behind it. Okay, there you go. That's what I would want, because then I could then control whether or not you're going to have an inflation expectation that is going to be elevated or not. Not by the cut. Like, it doesn't matter what you do with the cut. Just let me deliver the message, and then I can get my outcome. Because it doesn't matter what they cut. It doesn't matter what they do. It's how they deliver it. And it'll always be that way from now on. And that's the problem. Because the action would have been more powerful of a tool if they just don't say nothing. Then it would be a powerful tool. But the more they talk about it, the less power it has. And the more that they will deliver that message with a meaning that either it creates an elevated or that an inflation expectation that is either elevated or not. So that would be my answer. You guys could go ahead and cut it 4 times, a million times, whatever you want. I just want to be the one who delivers the message, okay? And then I can get my outcome. All right. Do people realize all money in the world is based on bank debt as a general society? If so, why is asking for more money printing to help, knowing that the interest inflation rate is then higher? People don't understand nothing. People don't understand anything about anything. Ugh. They don't. Like, people on this channel do. We do, because we talk about it every single day and sometimes twice a day for hours at times. But most people don't know anything about anything out there. And when it comes to trying to understand monetary policy, like, they would never have a clue about it. It's kind of sad to think how easy it is for them to do what it is that they are doing. And that's it. How easy it is for them to do this. I know people who are incredibly smart. Like, I'm wearing a rebel capitalist shirt. You realize the people who go to this event are some of the smartest people in the entire world when it comes to economics and understanding going like world policies and all the crap that's going down. Like when it comes to the level of understanding that what these guys have, I am just this little insignificant dude. None of them talk the way I do about monetary policy. Not a single one of them. I don't know if it's just from coming from a working class point of view, diving into monetary policy, but I've never heard any of them deliver a message that even remotely comes close to what I'm delivering. Some of them talk, I mean, we overlap. There's certain things like, I love Brent Johnson's and Jeff Snyder's theories. Those, the milkshake theory and the euro dollar is like to me, it's just like, oh my gosh, guys, thank you so much. I would like, it is the most incredible thing to have those guys deliver that information, to be able to receive it. Thank them so much, right? I mean, if you get the opportunity to, because I do, right? That is like incredible stuff. They still don't deliver what I'm delivering. Nobody is. Literally nobody. I can't find anybody. Right? You'll find people who they'll key in on certain things. Like they'll I'll talk about some aspect and there might be somebody who kind of covers a particular part of it. Like we all kind of have overlapping information. But when it comes to the credible threat theory and how it is that I believe that the Fed is conducting themselves, I think I got it dialed in better than anybody does. And I got it dialed in because of their own words. I'm using their own words against them. That's what gets me. Like I have developed, I don't mean like a 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13 different documents that I use to try and deliver the credible threat theory. I've narrowed it down to these 13 documents. Okay? I've highlighted certain areas of all these documents so that when people ask me the question, I can be like, right here, bang. This is where they said it. This is how they're doing it. This is the reason why. This is why I keep saying it over and over again, is because this is a 20-year long, 25-year long message that's being delivered here with monetary policy. This is something like I would never have been able to figure out what it is they're doing today if I hadn't dove back 20 years to understand how they have built this credible threat theory. All right? And it's not them calling it the credible threat theory. That's me. But it comes directly from a Ben Bernanke speech where he talks about a gold machine, like a hypothetical gold machine producing as much gold at will with very little cost or energy, and using that information, well verified and scientifically proven, push that out into the media to plummet the price of gold, even before the guy produces a single ounce of gold. Just the credible threat of him being able to do it is alone. Or enough alone to change the market's perception. That is what they are using today. This is what the beginning of this video was all about, was talking about how it is that they are doing this. That was a fine tuning of the particular of how it is that uncertainty is created within the economy, within the public's perception, by using many different people to disagree with each other about monetary policy, having the public view a particular individual as a committed view to the committee itself, when it's not. It's just the individual's view of the FOMC with 11 other people who are going to vote, and 5 alternates and 2 advisors. It's good stuff. Anyway, it's getting cold out here, guys. Are y'all bored? We got 83 likes and 105 people. What is it? Well, how much I got? Well, I got 20% on my phone, and it's getting kind of late. I guess it's like 8 o'clock right now or so. If you want to hang out, let's see. We got 107 people here. If you can get it up to 100 likes here in the next, say, I don't know, 5 minutes or so, I'll hang out. Otherwise, we'll call it a night because it's already kind of late. All right, let's cruise back here a little bit. Okay. Would the take... You guys are talking here. Okay, Bernanke used gold between 2 and 400 as a metric of the money supply. Now the money increased, gold goes up. Strange. Never bored. Thanks, guys. I appreciate it. Gold producers must be loving the price and might be better than gold. All right. We are over 100 likes. You're at 94. I see 94 likes. I see 98 people and 94 likes. All right, let's call it a night. It's 11 p.m. here on the East Coast. Oh, bummer, Will. Yeah, it's all right. Okay, here we go. UE with gold going up fast and equities are getting hammered. It's this an early response to potential credible threats? Well, I mean, well, you think about it, like people are really like if you create a situation in which that you are scared about your finance, you're scared about your wealth, right? You're scared about your retirement, you're scared about everything, right? But then you're also outside of this nation. So you might be scared of dollars, right? Or owning things that are in dollars, right? So it makes sense that the dollar may not be the safe haven that a lot of other nations or other people in other nations would think of it as. When you have situations like we got with Donald Trump freaking everybody out about tariffs and whatever actions that may come from that. So if you have no place to run, if you're like worried about putting it in your own stock market, if you're worried about putting it in the United States stock market or the United States real estate, and you have no idea what to do with it because you don't want to put it into cash, where are you going to go? You're going to go into gold and Bitcoin to a lesser extent, right? But gold would be like you really your only option. So it makes sense that during times of mass uncertainty like that, then it would make sense that people would be moving into a gold position simply because they don't want to be in a dollar position because of the worries of what it is that may come from being in a dollar position, whether it's in the stock or real estate or even cash. And then they're always maybe worried about their own sovereign nation and what they have going on in their own country. All right, I see 97 likes. We're like, what, 3 minutes away from calling it a night. Cody, great to see you up in here, brother. All right, I have $1 note from that one time I went to America. I don't feel scared. It's in its presence. Well, give it some time. You might fear it a little bit. All right. All right, that's just it. Gold is the only option because it's the only sound money that exists. But it's not the only option. And I mean, I agree. Don't get me wrong. It is sound money. And I like gold. I like silver. I like Bitcoin. I like those type of particular, I don't know if they're like those particular speculations. That's what I'm going to call them because that's what they are. But I do like them. I hold them. Hell, I got this here truck by trading or using silver as collateral to secure a loan for the truck. And the guy that I got the loan from, he was like, yeah, just pay me back anytime you want. You don't really have to rush it if you don't want. He's totally cool holding the silver. Of course, everybody is. As soon as you start clinking those bars together, you're like, oh man, I like this. And then not to mention, since we did the deal, it's gone up like $3 an ounce. So it's like, he's sitting there watching, $300 land into his, land in his asset, that he's holding. He was just like he didn't even bring up paying it back. He hasn't brought it up since, And I'm like, all right, man. Well, maybe we'll let you keep it. I don't know, just because I thought it was cool that he had like he got excited about it. Maybe he'll buy or silver after this, but I don't even know where I was going with that. I'm a fan of silver, but you're never going to have it as a currency. Never, ever, 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 ever will it be a currency in the United States. And if it is, you'll be seeing nothing but pain and misery and suffering upon the people. It will not be cool. It will be horrible. Now, don't get me wrong. Those of us who have loaded up on, well, who have tried to acquire as much as we can. I don't know if I'm necessarily loaded up, especially now that I'm starting to trade some away. But when you think about those of us who have been acquiring gold and silver and stacking silver, we are going to be the ones who are going to benefit the most from a absolute miserable, horrible, depressing time. I am not looking forward to doing something like that. But if it happens, I'm there, right? Like, I mean, I'm not going to deny the situation if it arises. To look forward to it, to say that it is the currency of all currencies and that's what we should be using in the United States, is literally begging for people to lose everything that they have in their life, and they will be suffering in poverty and misery because we do not produce enough within this country to sustain our standard of living. Import more than we export. We are not going to be able to maintain that, and we will find people rioting in the streets, and it will be chaos. I am not looking forward to it. I don't like this either, but you know, whatever. It's just like, it is what it is. So if we want to go back to the gold standard kind of thing, let's do it. Like, I'm down. Like, I think I can try. I mean, hell, I got my ideas, you know, I got some gold and silver. Let's do it, man. Let's see if we can make that stuff happen. But I don't know, man. I don't think that the people out there who are reliant on a debt-based currency and a retirement that is loaded on U.S. treasuries to switch over to a gold standard, knowing that they will never be able to get paid back. They will never be able to get their money. They will suffer in pain and misery. The people who are living a high luxurious life will, you know, find themselves living on the streets, and the only people whose lives won't be any different will be the bums who live today. Their life won't change. Oh man, I'm starting. Do I have glasses in here? I gotta go get some glasses. I can't see. What does that say? With the current conflicts, what does that say? With the current conflicts, what bigger threat to the money system, monetary system? Russia and China getting buddy, or for the U.S. hurt EU relations, boxing China in? Will, that's a great question. Thank you for the $10 in the support for the channel, man. I really appreciate it. You guys are awesome always for the support for the channel. I mean, I think honestly, the biggest threat to the money supply is the Federal Reserve not being able to provide the world with the liabilities without crashing the United States government. I think that's the biggest threat. I know people don't look at it like that. Sorry, guys, I'm trying to put a little bit of light on me here, but I know a lot of people probably wouldn't see it like that, but that to me is the biggest threat, that the Federal Reserve would not be able to print up enough money to cover the world-denominated debt, or the world's debt that is denominated in U.S. dollars. And if the Federal Reserve was to attempt to do that, you may end up finding that them crashing the United States government in that attempt to do it by buying up the U.S. treasuries in order to have an asset to put on their balance sheet in order to provide the world with a liability. Like, that's what they do now, and it's like sending the United States government on an unsustainable debt path. If like that, to me, is the biggest concern to monetary policy, is like, at what point does the Federal Reserve go, okay, what asset do we buy? Because if we do this with the United States, we're going to crash them. Right. And so this is one of the reasons why I think about the possibility of central bank digital currencies and stuff. I don't know. To me, that's the biggest threat. The world that's to the money supply, to the monetary policy, but you have to understand, the monetary system isn't exactly the economy either. Right? The economy is you and me and the production that we do. And what it is that we do with that production, how much debt we have, how it is that we acquire it. The economy is a much different thing than just like, the monetary system. How it is, because it's like more of like the financial system, really, if you think about it. It's not even really like you got the money supply, and then you have the financial system, like how debts are issued, and supplying debts and regulating the debt instruments that are out there. And so you have like different ways of looking at the economy. So you got like the financial system, which participates with the economy. Like, you and I could participate in economics without a bank, right? You and I can do transactions using dollars. But if the item gets big enough, one of us is probably not going to have enough dollars on hand in order to buy the item, say a house, right? I build a house, I want to sell it to you. We don't need financing to do it, but most of the time people don't have enough money to do it, so you do need to bring financing in, right? And so now you have financing as part of the economy. It wasn't before. It's not part of the original. The original is me trying to find food and shelter, right? And eventually, as we evolve and get into higher technologies, we have our standard of living in our life that we are trying to maintain. And the more we try to elevate that, the more it costs, right? So here comes the financing saying, hey, if you want to leverage your future, right, we can get you that item that you're talking about. But now the financial system is part of the economy. So you look at it differently. Same thing with government. Once you have built up enough production and savings within a nation and you have enough people who are saying, damn, we're really good at this, then you're going to have other people come in and say, hey, you know what? We ought to have a group of people who can regulate you all, right? And so, government, right? But it all starts with you and me in our actions. Like each and every single one of us owns our own economy, and then we react to each other, with each other, in the broader sense of how we deal with other things that are in the economy. Yeah. So like my economy and what I have going on is going to be different from somebody else's. See, I'm real excited. I've been selling off of my stocks so that I can get out of debt, right? Because I have acquired some debt that I thought I would be out of by now, and I'm not. So I'm ready to get out of that debt because there's no point in investing if you're paying interest on a debt. So get out of debt as soon as possible. And that was my goal for since last year that I wasn't able to achieve. And so I'm like, okay, so now that I'm going to get my taxes paid, get everything out, and get all my debts taken care of, right, except for the mortgage on my house, I'm going to feel in a much different position, right? My economy is going to look so much differently than my buddy who is just bought a brand new truck and trying to figure out whether his job's going to go on and exist and stuff like that. Like, I don't live that economy. That doesn't look anything like mine. Mine's going to soon be just very minimal lifestyle payments, making my mortgage payment. I got a few, subscriptions, for like we got internet now here at the house and Netflix. So the kids are really happy. The family's really happy about that. Lived 3 years without internet, right? Because I don't buy stuff. I am very, I keep it as low expenses as possible. But Sarah's been working and she wants that and the kids wanted it. So, hey, go for it, right? So now we got internet at the house and watching movies on Netflix for the first time in a long time that we've done that. But other than that, I keep it low. We're gonna get this stuff done, and my economy is going to be one of production and savings. Other people are gonna be, they're gonna be swimming in debt and trying to figure out how to make it. All right. Wow, look at all these comments. You guys are awesome. So I don't know. That's to me. Like I look at things so much differently. You know, there will be an eventual fall of the United States economy. Like we will fall into pain and suffering and misery once the new money turns off. How that new money turns off is anybody's guess, but every time I think that they, like in the past, that they would have failed to be able to continue to print the money, then they find a way to print the money. And so I don't think about them not being able to print the money. What I think of is how are they going to scheme up new ways to advance this system to continue the debt issuance, to continue the printing of the money. Because the more that, because if they do not print up the money, then what you are going to have is a collapse of the system, and pain and suffering and misery starts to follow. See, it's all about the expansion of new money. Think about any rising nation. Think about yourself. Okay, you don't even have to think about rising nations or anything else, because that's all the major stuff that comes from that has all these major symptoms that people blame as the reasonings behind it. Just take yourself, for example, right? If you're 18 years old and you get a job and you're working real hard at that job and you start doing a really good, skill, and you start becoming very productive for your boss, and your boss starts giving you raises, what do? You go out, you get a new truck and get an apartment. Now you've raised your standard of living. Now there's somebody else who's eventually going to come in after you have been working very hard at your job and you have become very good at your job and you have a lot of skills at your job and you're making a lot of money at your job and you have a lot of expenses because you're making a lot of money at your job. There's going to be somebody who comes in who doesn't know how to do your job, but they're going to be good at doing things that are very close to becoming your job. And this is where the problem lies, because your production and savings is now coming into production and debt payments because of the higher standard of living, and you're competing against a guy who's probably living in his car, who's now starting to take on skills that are very comparable to yours. They're not as good as first, right? So you're not too worried at the beginning, but he's getting better every single day, and he's living in his car, and he's hungry. So who do you think is going to be trying harder every single day at work to advance, making less money than you? Right? This is the situation that happens every day in the United States and across America and across the world, and it happens every day inside of counties and cities and countries and everywhere else, because this is the Cantillon effect. Once you have risen your standard of living, you will not be able to compete with the foreign production. There will be somebody else out there who's going to do what you can do cheaper than you can do it. And this is where the problem starts to come in. That's why I keep my expenses incredibly low. I will keep my expenses as low as possible, because I understand the Cantillon effect. If I lose income, I do not want it to impact my life to the things that start to the point that things start to deteriorate. I know that could happen. I know it can happen at any time because I've done it. I've been there. I've lived a deteriorated life. It ain't great. And you know what? I ain't scared of it because I've been there before, and it ain't that scary. Most people who have never lived a deteriorated life, one foot in the gutter and drunk as hell and no money and no way of getting to work and all that other stuff, they never lived a life like that. You know how scary of a situation that would be for them? To me, that ain't scary. Like, I lived like that for 20 years, You think that's scary? That ain't scary. There ain't nothing not scary to me. To me, I don't I look at that and I'm thinking to myself, I don't really even feel that far away from there. That's, I really don't. I don't buy fancy stuff. I don't have fancy clothing or, cars or, anything. I have meager stuff. You can put everything I own, you can put it in this Suburban, and then put it in the back of the Suburban way over there and still have room to put more stuff. I don't have that anything. Because I don't feel the need for it. Anything I want, I could have right now. It's weird to think. I've never had that kind of thing in my life. I pay any bill, right? Do whatever, it doesn't, whatever. And I've never had that kind of condition in my life before. And to think about having it now, when I was broke and had nothing, I didn't think it would be like this. Right? I thought the amount of money that I made last year when I was making absolutely nothing 10 years ago, if I was to say, hey man, in 10 years, this is how much money you're going to make, I would have thought my lifestyle would be so much different than it is today. Right? It's not the money. The money is really not even anything. It's just another, it's so weird to think about it being just another energy out there like anything else. It's not something that runs away. It's not something that is hard. It's not something of anything. It has no inner meaning other than just the meaning that it is. It's just money. And it's not something that is hard to get. Most people think it's hard to get. They believe it's hard to get. See, here's an example of it. See, here's actually an example of me putting myself in a position of where money is hard to get, and I was just doing it, and I'm getting myself out of that. I was standing in the flow of money. Think about this. I was standing in the flow of money. My phone's going to die here in a minute, so I'm going to call this, here in just a few. But I was standing in the flow of money, and money was like literally flowing past me. And I'm thinking, man, there was a lot of money that just came right through my hands over the last year, and it doesn't seem like I really saved it. Like I put money towards stocks and I bought some things, and I took care of like a lot of bills or whatever. But that's what happened. It's like the money came to me, got it, and it flowed through me. Like I didn't really retain any of it. Like I got some stuff, whatever, but it wasn't like a lot, right? Even though I saw options for I get offers for doing sponsorships, like in this flow of money, but I'm not in the position of receiving it. I was in the position of standing in the flow, which is fine if you don't, want to get anything. But if you're going to get anything, you have to be in a position of receiving. So standing in the flow wasn't the right position. And I realized by standing in the flow was holding on to credit card debt, was holding on to a car loan debt that I couldn't even drive the car. It was holding on to some of these things that I knew was hanging over my head that was costing me to do, but yet I'm standing here doing that. And I realized, well, if I'm going to be a receiver, I got to get rid of the what is causing me to stand in the flow and get into the position of receiving. And it's literally getting out of that debt. That will get me out of that standing in the flow, which is where I want to be. I mean, I want to be in the flow of it, but I want to be in the flow of receiving it, right? Not just flowing past me. And that's what it was doing. It was just flowing past me. And the reason it was flowing past me was because of the debt that I was holding. So as soon as I'm out of that debt, then I'll be in a position of being able to receive a lot more, because I have been receiving, but I want to receive more. And I don't want to be in a flow as much as I want to be in that, gathering and acquiring. So it's just literally being in that energy of it. And that's a simple one, right? Most people don't look at it like that. Like if you want to be in a flow of money or be in the abundance of money, you got to be in the position in which that money can flow towards you, like being at work, right? You got to go to work, or trying to figure out some way to do a line, or trying to figure out, right? Be in the position of receiving. So don't take on a lot of debt. Be in the flow of acquiring and don't take on a lot of debt. And then you'll find that, your position in life will be one that says, I don't need a new car. I rode, who am I here to impress, right? I mean, how many years, like, I mean, here it is since 2017, been doing videos in a busted old car. I don't know why things would change now. I don't know why anybody would think differently now, right? Okay, guys, I got to go. My phone's about ready to die. You all have been very great. Thank you so much for those super chats. You guys are very awesome with the support. You hit that like button a bunch of times. I see it's like at 109 with 130 people watching right now, which is like the most that I've had on all night. Thank you for joining in on today's live stream. I know the beginning was very confusing, but the link is down in the description for you guys to go read the speech yourself and break it down and think about that, how they use that uncertainty to create a better monetary policy for themselves by creating confusing situations simply by having many of the Fed presidents come out, the FOMC members, and literally disagreeing with each other on, I don't know if it's on purpose, but homeboy says it in this, speech that, they use it to their benefit. So anyway, thank you all for being here. Uneducated Economist, you guys let me know.